Today we're going to be talking about what makes a good small game. And we're going to start by looking at a game called 5 Seconds of Fire, which is available for free on itch.io. The concept is simple. It's a platforming game where your cursor has a ring that reveals the map, as well as there's an area around the player that reveals the map, and you use these two in tandem to get as good a picture of the level as possible to collect all the collectibles before time runs out. The aesthetic is quite distinct and probably unlike anything you've ever seen. As you can tell, red means walls, and that's it. You're in a cave and you're a little fire. You can tell you're fire because the title is 5 Seconds of Fire, as well as you have particle effects that are getting smaller with time coming out of you, much like sparks from a flame. Very effective, very simple, very easy for the developer to create because aesthetic is not the big selling point of this game. It is supposed to be a stressful platformer game where you're racing against the clock, and you don't need an in-depth aesthetic for that, and that's great. Next, we have interesting mechanic regarding the vision that you have as the player. Unfortunately, as you can see in the video, I'm actually not utilizing it too much and still doing fairly well. That is because it is too hard to track the position of your cursor and all the field of view that comes with that, as well as the field of view and position and movement of the player. It's much easier to keep the cursor in the center so that you always have a pretty good idea of the map, and then just go from there and attempt to explore the entirety of the cave, which is not hard because the player's jumps are quite floaty and you have no trouble making difficult jumps. It's not actually that much of a precision platformer. It's more that if you do screw up, you're eating into valuable time. That's really where the stress comes from, not so much of can you actually pull off an accurate jump. And also the fact that the player moves so quickly, you don't actually need to look ahead. The caves are randomly generated, but it doesn't branch out in such a way where you really need to look ahead to see if it's worthwhile going down a branch. Your player moves so quick and the tunnels are so short that you're better off just trying every single branch. So those are things that works really good and really poorly about the game. The main point being that if I were asked to, say, pay for this game or ask if I would greenlight a larger version of this game, I would say no without some major tuning so that the actual main mechanic that the developer is trying to focus on, that being the amount of vision you have, is actually an important one. Otherwise, why bother? There are plenty of other platformers that are bigger and thus more bang for my buck. Next, let's talk about one of my favorite small games of all time, made by one of my favorite developers of all time, Wolfire Games. What you're looking at is a first-person shooter unlike anything you've ever played before because they focused on the operation of the gun. You will see on the right side of the screen a list of commands, a list of controls for the game, each one controlling a tiny portion of what the gun can do overall. Everything you see there is listed as the controls to aim and shoot the gun properly, including pulling back the hammer, pulling out the magazine, and turning off and on the safety. The other thing to note about this game is that you die much quicker than your opponents. Your opponents are automated machines like turrets and flying bots that will electrocute you, and if you do not shoot them in the correct location, your bullet will do nothing to them. That said, if you are hit once at any point with a bullet, you are dead, and the game is over. You must start over. Similar to 5 Seconds of Fire, you are collecting objects from around the level, which is randomly generated. I think it's pretty clear at this point that randomly generating levels is a great tactic for small games to bring an even greater amount of content to their game without much more development time and effort. Of course, each level might not have as much purpose and detail as you might like, but for small games made by smaller developers, it is a great strategy. 5 Seconds of Fire was going for a very stressful feel, racing the clock, high energy music. Receiver is also going for a stressful feel, but it's also going for a very suspenseful one as well. The level is dark, the walking speed is slow, and knowing that you need to perform 2 or 3 different key commands in order to get a simple operation to happen with your gun at any moment really adds to the pressure, considering the fact you go down with one mistake. I think again it's important for us to ask ourselves, what is the one thing that the developer was trying to make this game stand out from the rest? The thing that they spent far more time on than anything else. I think this is what I mean when I say small game. If you had to describe this game in one sentence, A, could you do it? And B, what would that sentence be? I think I would do best by paraphrasing the Steam page for Receiver and say it is an FPS challenge which explores gun handling mechanics. When you hear that, you probably expect to see a twist on the normal aim and shoot that you would find in most other FPSs, which is certainly the case for Receiver, and they did a phenomenal job. I think most people who play Receiver at first find the controls to be frustrating and unnecessary, but when you realize that is the exact point of the game, and that is actually the thing you should be focusing on, suddenly it becomes an extremely satisfying experience. Suddenly, killing a turret in the first shot, knowing you hit its critical point, and conserved a little bit of ammo along the way, feels really good. This is why Receiver is my favorite small game, and one that I will plug till the day I die. They picked a theme, they picked a mechanic, they nailed both, and then they also made it fun, which is an important part of any game. Finally, I'd like to talk about a small game that many people don't even think is a game, and actually was quite a bit of a controversy when it first came out. The game is called Proteus, and you play as a person walking through a pixelated, beautiful landscape with amazing music and very interesting aesthetic. You spend one day and one night in each season, but beyond walking around, there really isn't too much interaction the player has with the world. You can come across various different creatures and plants that do various different things, such as make sounds, but other than that, there really isn't anything for you to do. No score to keep, no way to win, no gold reach. It is for that reason that many people say this is a bad game, or even not a game at all. I personally think that anyone who does their background research on this game would be pleasantly surprised with the thing that they got, but if you simply bought it based on taking a look at a couple screenshots, you may get the wrong idea, and I would understand how you'd be upset. That said, I think we find ourselves back at the point where we have to ask ourselves, what did the developers want from this game, and what did they market it to the consumers as? It was never marketed as something more intricate or complicated or interactive as it was. And I think it's pretty clear that the developers wanted a calming, immersive experience for people to go through. And I think that they actually achieved that. I would not spend more than an hour on this game, or two, but it is something that I would recommend for someone who wants an almost zen experience and something to kill a bit of time with. I also think it's incredibly important to note that it's really clear that a lot of time, effort, and love was put into this game. The audio is amazing, the aesthetic is adorable, and everything fits into a single coherent theme. It is for that reason that I think that Proteus was a big success, but at the same time I recognize that only a certain type of gamer would appreciate this kind of a thing, and it's perfectly fine for those people who don't appreciate it to list a number of reasons, including the limited amount of interactiveness, lack of any sort of storyline or character, as reasons for why the game is not for them. I'm now going to sort of wrap up this video with why this is important and why I even bother bringing it up. There have been some relatively recent changes to the gaming industry that make good small games more important than ever, rather than making a small game that is only mediocre. The biggest reason I can think of as to why this is important is that the largest PC game distributor, Steam, has recently launched a refund policy where as long as you've played less than 2 hours of a game, you can get your money back if you're not satisfied. Developers of small games were concerned that this was going to lead to people asking for a refund on games that simply just don't take more than 2 hours to play. There are other safeguards involved in the program so that people can't abuse the refund policy, but I think it's still a valid concern. But if you do make a game that is good enough for people to possibly want to play through again later, or to keep around so they can show their friends, you won't really have this problem. This is where mechanics like having randomly generated levels so there's an infinite amount of content for the player to see actually can really help the game developer. Another big reason why making a good small game is important is because the indie market and the small games market is bigger than ever. With platforms like itch.io and Steam Greenlight, these games are being produced very quickly and all the time. It is important when you make a game that you do it in such a way that people are going to actually notice it, enjoy it, and buy your next title, which can be a bit tricky when you're not making the next Call of Duty or Fallout game. This is why indie and small games that stand out to us and end up being successful generally focus on a narrow part of the game and push other parts of the game development to back burner, such as story or aesthetic. Oftentimes, simply picking a genre to make your game in is too broad for such a small game or such a small development team, because at the end of the day, the world just doesn't need another fill-in-the-blank game in such and such a genre. They need a finely tuned experience, something that is unique, something specifically done better or different than any other way it's ever been done before. Otherwise, your game is going to get lost in the swarm of games that are being pushed out right now. Small games can be centered around a single mechanic, a single theme, or sometimes even something as simple as a single art style, and that can be enough to pull players in. But until the development team finds something that they choose to work on and work on and work on until the players just have to say, wow, it probably doesn't have that big of a chance of being a success. My Steam library is filled with tiny games that I love to come back to from time to time, and I think I've shown you 3 examples today of games that aren't perfect but aren't bad either. Let me know down in the comments what your favorite small game is. And thanks for watching this video. See you in the next one.